Yeah, well, let me put it a little bit closer to me, so I don't have to. Okay, you can hear me? Can you see me? Okay. All right. You heard my name is Miriam Litke. I was married for 68 years to my late husband, Rabbi Joe Litke, and the baby you just saw is named after him. Baruch Hashem, it's the third baby that's named after him. The first one was also a Chimesh. Is that the name for the fifth generation, I think? The second one was just a great-great-grandson. And now we have the little one here, Baruch Hashem. I call myself a child of non-survivors. In other words, we know about children of survivors, grandchildren of survivors, but my parents did not survive. But they had the foresight and the strength to send me away when there was a chance to do that on the Kindertransport. And this is what the subject matter is tonight, the Kindertransport. There were close to 10,000 children that England took in Great Britain at the time, between the time of the 38 and 39. I grew up in a very warm, loving family together with my brother, Eli or Shalom. And we had a big connection to our shul, which was right in our courtyard in the big apartment buildings in a big city of Berlin. So there were youth groups which we attended, especially my brother, who's a few years older than I. Actually, I would say that altogether there are three kinds of Kindertransport. There was the one that I went on, there's the one that my brother came to England on, with Youth Aliyah, with Resha Freya. And then there's the one that my husband came on as a young yeshiva bocher, which I don't know if it can be considered a Kindertransport, but it's also a similar, same story as escaping when it was possible. And if we have time later, we can elaborate on that as well. My early childhood was very happy and very warm. In 1933, the year that Hitler came to power, was also my first year of school. And my school years were fine in the beginning, but as I got a little bit older, and Hitler was in power for a few years, I would hide in doorways of big buildings in order not to have to watch the march by of the Nazis and have to put up my hand. These are the kind of memories that I have as a young child. I'm giving you a little bit of background before the actual Kindertransport, so to give you a broader picture of what went on in my life and my home. In October 1938, the Nazis had decided that all the Polish nationals, which my parents were to be deported to Poland. Luckily, in a big city like Berlin, they took only the men and the boys over 15. In other towns, they took whole families and they put them on trains and shipped them to the border between Germany and Poland, a place called Spongin, or Benchen in German. The Polish government got wind of it and they closed the border. So here they were in sort of no man's land. They couldn't come back and they couldn't go forward. They were housed in an old mill, very big old mill, which my father told us about when he was able to return to us. And they were taken care of by various people, including a young nurse who would sing to them Yiddish songs. Those songs he taught me and I learned. And I've heard them sung here in Israel by Chava Alberstein. And it's very meaningful to me. My mother was left in Berlin without my father, with the children, and she was very busy running around trying to find a way out, going to various consulates, especially South American ones, to buy visas. The visas were bought, but they were worthless. For me, perhaps it was a lesson in geography, because she went to the continent of Chile and of Argentina and to Siam and things, some of the countries that don't exist anymore today or have changed their names. In any case, there was no use. Also during this time, we were forced to give up half our apartment to another family, because it was said that you don't need all that much room, you can take somebody else in another Jewish family. These are some of my memories. Meantime, my brother was preparing with Youth Aliyah to come to Palestine via England. He had already been in Hafshara in Germany, and the plan was to have 6 months in England in order to prepare for Palestine. Well, we know what happened during those 6 months. The war broke out, and of course then those youngsters couldn't go at that point to Palestine. And after 6 months, my father was allowed to return to us, to Berlin, in order to, in quotes, give up a business which was already non-existent, because as soon as Hitler came to power, his store was closed. We had a shop up until 1933 with retail stuff. And so we had to prepare to leave Berlin. Where was there to go? Only Poland. There was nowhere else to go. The United States quota for Poland was non-existent. They didn't let anybody in on the Polish passport. And the belongings were packed and given to a shipper in order to forward them to Lodz, where my parents had grandparents there as well. And also at the same time, my mother had prepared for me a lodinya, a trousseau. At the age of 11, she wanted to make sure that while she was sending me away, that I would have something for the future. She planned. At the end of June, we went together. I went with my parents to Poland. I did not have my papers yet for the Kindertransport, so I went with them. And for me, this was a fun vacation, because I had only met some of my relatives one time, 2 years earlier, when my mother took me there. And I had fun meeting uncles, aunts, grandparents, cousins, and it was like just a nice time for me as a little girl. I did not realize the seriousness of the situation at the time. And I was spoiled, and that was nice. Until my papers came for the Kindertransport, and I had to get ready to leave Lodz and get back to Berlin. My mother prepared for me some new dresses. She was a master dressmaker, made sure I had a warm coat, shoes, everything that could fit into a small suitcase. I want to digress a moment about the suitcase. A few years ago, my husband and I were in London and went to the Churchill ballrooms. If you've ever been there, it's most interesting. And part of what I heard on the earphones or the explanations was, I saw a lot of suitcases under the beds. They would take their suitcases with them, and if possible, if the bombs allowed it, they could go home to sleep. It was called the War of the Suitcases, and it rang such a bell with me because having visited Poland and Auschwitz since I'm living here, and the suitcases that you see there, and all us little children with our suitcases, it was indeed a very meaningful thing. My parents took me to the train in Lodz and to the station, and my father put me into the compartment. My mother stayed behind on the platform. She didn't come as far as the compartment. I think she had already done it for my brother, and it was probably too much. I had just read recently in one of the books that I've displayed here that one girl was taken to the station by the maid. Her mother didn't come with her at all. And that also tells a story in itself. So as I said, my father took me to the compartment, and there was a man there, and he said, can you take care of my daughter, make sure she gets out of Berlin at the right station, and so on. He said, yes, sure, but I don't know what happened to him. I didn't see him again. We arrived in Berlin. The day that I arrived, I found out I had just missed a transport. Transport had left the same day, and I had to wait 10 days in Berlin for the next Kindertransport. 10 days alone, but I knew where to go. There was a women's and children's hostel not far from where we lived, and that's where I stayed for the 10 days until the next transport came. Also, my father had asked me to go to the shipper because our goods had not arrived. And I don't know if they ever did because, as we know, things were just stolen and there was nothing you could do about it. When the time finally came for me to join up with the other children on the transport, it was already about 10 days before the war, I think, August 19, something like that. I got there 10 days before war broke out. And on the train, the Nazis went through all the things that the children had with them, the suitcases and so on. I have since met one woman who actually spoke for us at one of the Emuna commemorations, who had her necklace torn off her neck, and she still has the scar. This is what they did to the children on the train. As soon as we crossed the border into Holland, we were greeted with hot chocolate and biscuits and smiles, and it was a different world altogether. We went on to the train through the Hook of Holland and landed in England and got a train to Liverpool Street Station. If any of you travel to London, you can see now a monument in Liverpool Street Station to the children that came on the Kindertransport. I was taken to Willesden Lane Hostel, which was a hostel for the children I think it was probably all the girls, if I remember rightly. And there I had my first taste of cornflakes, which I'd never seen before. But also I had there my first crisis. My first sense of the picnic is over, this is very serious. What happened was that we were to be registered with the local school to be evacuated on a Sunday morning out of London into the countryside, in my case in Hertfordshire. And in order to do that, we were all told we must sign the papers. Well, this is Shabbat, this is Friday night, and how was I ever going to do that? So I argued, I remember arguing, and I wouldn't and I couldn't, but I can tell you honestly that as of this time, I don't remember whether I signed or I didn't sign. It's one of the blocks, I guess, which is okay. We were taken on a train on Sunday morning to Hertfordshire, in this case a little town called Hemel Hempstead, and there we were assembled in some kind of a hall. The local people came, those who had, I suppose, volunteered to take in children, and we were together with the English kids. We were a group of refugee children. We were all together from the same school. And the people came and they decided to look at you and see, I'll take you, I'll take you. I called it pick a kid. I was lucky. I was picked together with another little girl, a year younger than I, and we had at least each other. We were taken in by a family that was very kind and very warm and loving to us, at least in the first couple of years. We were not allowed to speak German at all, so we could whisper to each other in our beds at night. The name of the people who took me in was Overhead, and we called them Auntie Alice and Uncle Bert. That's what we did. That's what kids in England do. And she was very nice. She would say to me, "Don't cry. I will be your mother." And the more she said it, the more I cried. But I have to say that the gratitude that we owe them for their pure motives to protect the children from the London bombs is not to be emphasized enough, because they really did it out of the goodness of their hearts. The only problem was that the war took too long. It took much too long. And if you volunteer to take in a few kids, you don't expect them to do it for 5 years. We were able to write letters, at least my brother and I. Oh, by the way, I should back up a little. My brother came to Scotland, not to London, so we had a far distance between us, and we would write to each other. I would write more than he, but that's also history. We were able to write through Belgium. We had relatives in Belgium who would send the letters on to Poland. Once Belgium was invaded by the Nazis, that stopped, and we only had the ability to write on a Red Cross letter 25 words or less. The last letter that I wrote that way was returned to me as undeliverable, and I still have it. I have also some letters from my parents, still that I was able to get while it was still possible. The group of refugee children, together with the native English kids, were, as I said, together in school. And unsurprisingly, the refugee kids outdid the English kids in school in no time at all. The teachers were very nice, and they were trying their best to keep the children interested, and especially the brighter ones, to make them to make them learn as much as they possibly could. We had a cheder nearby in a little town nearby after school from time to time. And my brother in Scotland was not able to visit me until 2 years after we were in England. There were no funds, there was no money. He was living in Whittingham in a castle given to Euthalia by Lord Balfour, and he was doing the things that they were told that they were going to be preparing for Aliyah. And meantime, as they got older, they started to form kibbutzim in various parts of England and Wales. And this way they were able to join what was called the Land Army and do their war effort as well. Eventually he joined the British Army. They wanted him in the Polish Army, but he absolutely refused. He said, if I'm going to the army, I'm only going to the British Army. Therefore, eventually, they opened up a kibbutz in Buckinghamshire. It's called Kibbutz Buckingham, and it's quite well known. And the people who started out there, a great majority of them founded Lavi here in Israel, Kibbutz Lavi. I have at home 5 years of letters that I wrote to my brother. When he passed away, my nephew went through his papers and he found every letter I ever wrote to him. And he gave them to me. And I guess there's another whole story in that as well. Also, since we lived outside of London, Auntie Alice would take in boarders for overnight. People would take a train, it was only a 1-hour train ride from London, in order to get a good night's sleep. So these people needed a cup of tea or something else, and they didn't bring their ration books. So whatever rations there were from the people who lived in the house, and including Inga and myself, were also given over to the overnight guests, and we did not really have too much to eat. We were not hungry ever, but we had no pocket money. We had to submit to the committee, Bloomsbury House, every item that we needed for our day-to-day living. We needed pencils for school, or bobby pins for the hair, or toilet articles. We had to submit a list and we would get money for that, but there was nothing extra. I remember very distinctly going back and forth from school, passing what we would call today a macolet, and not being able to buy anything because I didn't have the money. But there was no hunger for such. There was just ordinary longing of a young kid for extras. We became teenagers, and as teenagers, I must tell you today that I never heard the word of hormones. I think it didn't exist or we weren't allowed any. So how we managed with that, I don't know, but we did. Came Pesach, the first Pesach, we were taken back to the Wilson Lane hostel just to spend the Pesach there and not to stay with the family that I was with, who were Gentiles. I'm sure if I didn't say that, I think it was clear. The second Pesach, we actually organized ourselves in Hemel-Hempstead already, we kashered, and we did, and by that time there were a very few handful of Jewish English families who had also moved to the community to get away from the London Blitz. And that we were able to make Pesach by ourselves. The third year of the war of Pesach was already in Buckingham, in the kibbutz. I went to visit my brother. He was already in Buckingham, and I was very happy to go there. And I was 15 at the time, and I thought, wow, now I have a place to be. I was ready to leave. I was longing to get away and get back to my own environment, so to speak, at least as much as possible. I had a wonderful Pesach there, but I was not allowed to stay. I was too young. So I had to go back to Hemel-Hempstead and to my foster family. Today, when I talk about this and I think back, and I said, what a ridiculous thing not to take in the sister of one of the kibbutz members because she was young. So what? She'll get older, you know? But don't let her go back there. But that's not what happened. And I have various thoughts like that. One of my big questions is, where was British Jewry? I was not aware during the 5 years that I lived with a foster family that there were hostels for only Jewish children, that there was a school in Shefford run by Rabbi Schoenfeld with 600 children. I was not aware that there were children who were taken in by Jewish families. I only knew that little enclave I was in, we were perhaps a dozen children, maybe 15 refugee children. And I was actually in touch with one of them years later who lived in Netanya. He's since died. But that's something that is always in the back of my mind. When I think of what we did here, I wasn't here yet, but what Israel did to take in hundreds of thousands of millions and feed them and house them under very, very difficult circumstances, I still have to think back and say, why did they let us stay where we were? However, I was very lucky. I always considered myself lucky. Nobody converted me, although they wanted to adopt me, but it didn't. There was nothing much to talk about there. They weren't churchgoers. They didn't, there was no religion other than my own for myself. So that was also a good thing, because one young woman, she was 3 years older than I, she came from Nuremberg. She showed me a picture of her mother with a sheitel. And she would daven 3 times a day. And she was taken in by a childless couple just around the corner from me. We see each other often. And she joined the Women's Army, the ATS, and she intermarried. And she was lost. I will give you a statistic of the 10,000 children who came on the Kindertransport. We lost 1/3. 1/3. And that's a very, very sad, very, very sad, what shall I say, thing to say about British children. The war dragged on. It became too much for my Auntie Alice, and after a few years, she became moody. She was hard to please. And I never knew, both Inga never knew what would happen when we come home from school. were we okay? Did we do something wrong or didn't we? It was a very, very difficult time. Finally, in 1944, Hanukkah time, my brother and sister-in-law got married. My sister-in-law went for a visit to the kibbutz. They met each other and she decided to stay on the kibbutz. And I went to the kibbutz Buckingham for the wedding. Hanukkah 1944. I met the rest of her family. She had a sister and her parents. And they invited me to spend the Shabbat with them. I was very excited because I really wanted to go. And the circumstances in Hemel Hempstead were such that Auntie Ella said to me, if you go away, you're never coming back. I won't let you back in. I said, hooray, that's what I want. I mean, with tears and with crying and with emotion, but that is what I was praying for. So I went, and she didn't, and I had no intention of going back. I went. They lived also in the countryside in Hertfordshire in a little town named Letchworth. Letchworth was founded by a whole Jewish community at the beginning of the war, getting away from London, built by a well-known man in London, Abba Bornstein. He built an estate there and he rented it all out to all the Frum Jews there. So I went there. They had 2 rooms upstairs in a little house, and they took me in. I became the 3rd daughter. There was no question. On the way there, I had to take 3 buses. Hitler had sent us the buzz bombs. The buzz bombs were great because as long as you heard them, you knew you were okay. But when they stopped buzzing, they would fall. So it was a very dangerous time. But people went and people traveled and it didn't stop anybody. I got to the next town, which was called Luton, and waited at the bus stop, double-decker bus, and somebody called my name from up in the bus, and it was Miriam. It was my sister-in-law's sister. She saw me, and I was going on the same bus, and it's not such a coincidence. I think it was meant to be that she was there and we could travel the rest of the time together. I want to tell you that she comes here. She has a lot of family here. She comes here for all the Chagim. She was here Pesach. We got together. We saw each other. We lunched together, and we're still the closest friends ad hayom, Baruch Hashem. I want to tell you another story about another kind, to show you really how lucky I am and was. There were twins, 3 years old, who were put on the Kindertransport by their mother, who was a single mother. They were taken in and adopted by a, how do you say galach in English? Priest. But no, not a priest, no, a minister. A minister, right. And his wife, who were childless. And they were brought up, not told who they were, where they came from. They were just told that they were their children. At 3 years old, you don't have too much of a memory. The younger one, Susie, survived nicely. The older one, as she got older, developed a brain tumor and she died in her 30s. But the story I want to tell you a little bit about is Susie, a girl named Susie. She she was abused. She finally wrote a book and and made a movie about herself. She was abused by the minister in every which way that you can imagine. She became a nurse. She was able to leave the place. She became a nurse. She got married. She has a son. The son would sing in the church choir, and she wondered, where does he get this voice from? Not my husband or from me. One day she listened to the radio, which one did in those days, and she heard an announcement about a reunion of a Kindertransport. A woman in England named Bertha Leviton had organized the 50th reunion of the Kinder in London in 1989. And she was intrigued because when she was in school and she had to take her A-level tests, they didn't put her in the alphabetical order that her present name, but they put her with the name of her original with a B, which was Bechover. And she didn't pay too much attention, but it reminded her. And she got in touch with this Bertha Lavender, and she was told she helped her to look into her history. She found out for her who she was, where she came from. She put her in touch with her relatives in Washington Heights, the Breuer community. She was a Breuer. It's true that her mother had the babies out of wedlock, and the family had nothing to do with her. So that's why she sent the twins away, because she had nowhere to go to. But the whole idea of where she comes from and what happened to her in her growing years. So I'm going to go fast forward. In 1999, the 60th reunion of the Kindertransport, she was there with her husband. And she was interviewed, and she was asked, by the way, the relationship between her and her relatives in Washington Heights is excellent. They invited her to all their smachot, very, very good. But she reminded how she had grown up. She was comfortable in being a Christian. She didn't want to change. And her husband was asked, what do you think? Her name changed. She said, it was hard to get used to, but said it's okay. The marriage lasts, this is 1999, I don't know whether, I haven't heard anything since, but she wrote a book, and there was a film made from her, and it's just one example of what happened to one child. And I thought it was worthwhile to share it with you. When I was able to, when I finally left my foster home, and I met again the people who lived in that community as well. There was a family of Schädelmachers, and the grandmother said to me, "Oh, a jiddische Neshome is gerettet geworden." For those who don't know, Yiddish means a Jewish soul was saved. And I looked at her and I said to her, "But was no thanks to you. You could have also taken me. You lived in tight quarters. So what?" You know, the attitude, everybody had to save himself at the time. At the reunion in 1989, my husband and I, we first went with a group from Yad Vashem to Poland. I felt I needed to see where my parents spent their last days. And we went together with a group, and we did the usual things that were done, that are done in Poland even nowadays. So I won't go into that at all. But when we got to the Kindertransport reunion in London, There were about 1,000 kinder there. We all call each other kinder, doesn't matter how old you are. And the majority, we were seated in tables from where you came from. The great majority from Berlin, because that was after all the biggest population. The next one was Vienna, and then you had others. There was people there from Nepal, Australia, of course, Canada, all over the world. And there were speakers, there were get-togethers, there were reminiscences, but I did not find anybody that I knew from before. Not from my school, not from there was somebody from the school, but I didn't do her. And I felt again like a lost little girl. Why don't I know anybody? Why doesn't anybody know me? However, with a big difference. I had a husband, I had a family, I had children, and I was living in Israel. So I was very thankful for everything that I had. Toward the last day of the reunion, there were questions and answers, and people were asked to come up to the mic and see if they had comments to make. And people went up, and the one I remember in particular, she said, "I am so most grateful to the British government for taking us in. I feel 110% British. There's nothing that I would rather be than British and in England and live here and spend the rest of my life here. And I just want to thank England for everything that they did for me." Fine. Very nice, very true. And I thought, well, I have to say something about that too. And I made my way up to the platform. I didn't know what I was going to say exactly, but I said, "Please come up." So I started to say, I said, also very grateful to England, because if not for England, where would we all be? There's no question that we owe gratitude. But I will tell you that I became a British citizen as a minor, special dispensation, they gave us passports. Subsequently, I married my husband and moved with him to Canada. He was at that time a Canadian citizen. I became Canadian with a passport, because in Poland, when I left Poland, they confiscated my passport. I was stateless. I was a non-person. I belonged no place. So I had British, I had Canadian. Then we moved to the United States, and I became an American citizen. And I told them 3 years ago, we moved to Israel. And when I go back home, I will become an Israeli citizen. And that's the only passport that's meaningful to me. And that's what I said at the time, and it holds true today as well. There was one young woman who came to the mic, and she said she had written letters to her parents for 17 years, knowing that her parents were dead, and they would never read them. But this, she had the compulsion to keep writing the letters. So you have all kinds of different aspects of this Kindertransport. There was also a gentleman by the name of Nicholas Winton. He became Sir Nicholas Winton. He was vacationing in Czechoslovakia during the upheaval that was starting in Germany, and he brought back with him to England about 750 children. They were called Winton's children. And they were at the reunion. He was there. He was already 90 years old then, spry and bright as can be. And it was a beautiful thing to see that how the children that he brought back with him were still in touch with him, and how they loved him. I want to just shortly a little bit touch on my husband's experience too. He was a little older. He came with a yeshiva from Frankfurt. the Schneider Yeshiva in Frankfurt to London. The whole yeshiva was able to, through connections that Rav Schneider had, to get to England. And there settled into the yeshiva life until the war broke out and the British decided that all German nationals, all people who came from Germany over the age of, 18, 16, were to be interned. So the yeshiva boys had to be interned. They were interned in the Isle of Man, giving you a very short version, because it's late. And they were shipped out as prisoners of war, together with Nazi prisoners of war, to Canada and Australia. We know that one ship to Australia was torpedoed and drowned. We also know that the British soldiers who were in charge of the people on the ships robbed them blind. Anybody who had anything valuable, watch or whatever, it was not a good scene. There's a book on the table called Deemed Suspect, written by one of the men who was on this ship to Canada, Eric Koch. And all you have to do is look in the back of the book and the index to see what happened to the people who came to Canada. Where did they end up? As professors, at Nobel Prize winners, as rabbis, etc., etc. Just look at the back of the book. You don't have to do more. It's a wonderful book in any case. I have there also a brochure from Whittingham, where my brother was on Hochschild. And I have various things that appeared in the post. There's a book written by the Kinder called I Came Alone. There's a book written by Whiteman, all about the Kindertransport. She was in touch with a lot of us and wrote about it. I have one more, what shall I say, a beef, so to speak, a criticism about something to do with the Kindertransport, not the people, but a play that was written by an English woman named Diane Samuels. It was performed here in Israel many, many times to many, many schools. I know because I was asked to speak to the schools after the end of the performance. I was many times in the Jerusalem Theater, downstairs in the theater, a wonderful performance. The play deals with a kid who was shipped out of Germany to England. She ended up in Manchester with also a Gentile woman by the name of Lil. She brought with her in her little suitcase Haggadah and other little Jewish artifacts, and also the book The Pied Piper of Hamelin. And throughout the play, that book is prevalent as a very scary kind of a motif in the play. The pipe, you know what happened to the Pied Piper? He piped all the kids out of town. Anyway, she's brought up and she gets used to, and her mother said to her before she left, "Be good, remember me, I am coming to get you. I will come and get you." And so it happened. Eva, she was taught her, she grew up, and by the time she was 16, her mother came back from the dead. She didn't want to know about her. She refused to go with her to America. She asked, I'm staying here, I'm not coming with you. Now the foster mother or the adopted mother, Lil, in the play, there's not a word that they say to each other. Two women who love the same child and nothing between them. But there's not a man in that play altogether. but the thing I'm emphasizing is this was Manchester. It was not Hemel Hempstead, Hertfordshire. It was not Reading. It was Manchester, the second largest Jewish community in England, who even in those years already had a good Jewish community. Not compared to today, but it didn't have. Why did this child end up with a Gentile woman? So to me, that the bottom falls out of the play because of that. Although I talked about it a lot, I talked to all the children. This Eva, she got married. You find that out during the play, and she names her daughter Faith. Emunah. The daughter goes to the attic to look at some old boxes, and she finds the Haggadah, and she finds other things. And the mother had never told her where she comes from. So here we have this whole circle. The daughter knows nothing because the mother wouldn't tell her, and she finds all these things, and she says, "Where am I from? Who are you? What am I?" It's as a play, it's a very good play, but as reality, it's very, very sad. In any case, when I speak to young people, I usually ask them, "Where were you at age 8, 9, 10, and so on?" And then I go on. Well, I don't have to do that here, I don't think. And I'm just looking for my last page, just a second. Well, I don't know where it is, doesn't matter. This is a program of the Kindertransport that was performed at the AACI a few years ago, where I also spoke. I just want to say that I feel it's so important to keep repeating the stories so that we should not forget, and especially if we have a chance to talk to younger people. It's really of the uttermost importance that we keep the memory alive, that we keep talking as much as we can. We have at least twice a year here in Israel, thank God, and tomorrow afternoon, I just want to say, there is a commemoration meeting in the Chovevei Shul at 4 o'clock in the afternoon with a speaker who is a Holocaust survivor. I want to thank you all very much for coming and hearing me out. And I will emphasize again that in my case, I was very lucky, Baruch Hashem. For me, I was taken care of. The people who took me in were good people. I was able to find a new family. I was interviewed at the reunion, the 50th reunion by the BBC. And I will finish with this. And the lady who interviewed me, how could you retain your faith, your religion, after all the things that you went through and all the things that, the years and so on and so forth? How were you able to do that? I said, well, when I was able to reunite with family, my brother's family, my sister-in-law's family, it seemed like a warm blanket was returned to me. Something had been taken away for a while, but it was mine again. It was given back to me, and that's how I felt, and that's how I feel now. That Baruch Hashem, everything that happened was in the past, and I'm very happy the way things are now. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Miriam, it happens to be my neighbor. We met at a Shabbos table, and I feel like so much that my life has been enriched by knowing her and having the opportunity to share Shabboses together and to talk about these things. I think there are some questions.
Absolutely, sure. I lost my last one.
What happened to your father at the border?
What happened to my father? Okay, he was housed in a window. He chose not to, even when the border was open, he chose not to go into lodge to his parents, to his siblings, and he was able to come back. He was allowed to come back to Berlin with the proviso that he has to give up all the business and get out within a few months, which we did. We're talking about March, April, and by June we were back in Poland. So he was allowed to come back to Germany, but only because they wouldn't let him stay there. He had to get out wherever he could, and the only place to get out was Poland. At that point, he was a Polish citizen. They had to let him in.
And then how did he come to England?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
No. Yes, if he came to England, if your father came to England.
No. My parents were in Lodge Ghetto. They did not survive. All the information that we have is that they ended up in Auschwitz. I have information from Yad Vashem. I guided in Yad Vashem for about 10 years. And I got a lot of information and spoke to a lot of people. The same thing with my husband's parents. My husband was from Kassel. His parents were taken first to Riga, and from there to Stutthof, which was also a camp, a killing camp. So we do have the information. This is what happened. My mother was one of 9 siblings. One brother took himself to Russia to fight with the Russians, and he survived. He later moved to Australia, where I still have some cousins. But otherwise, I don't know of anybody who survived, of all the siblings, all the cousins, and my father's as well.
Do you know what happened to the other little girl, I think you said her name?
Yeah, Ina, yeah. Good question. She had a grandmother in London who she could see from time to time. She was originally from Vienna, but came on the Kindertransport through Italy because she with her family had already emigrated to Italy from Vienna to get out of Vienna. So she was able to reunite with her parents after the war. We met many, many years later in California. She wanted to find me. So what did she do? I had sent her a wedding invitation. She knew my husband was a rabbi. But one of her children found the invitation in the garage in the box. She told me the story. So she said, how do I find this rabbi? How do I find this? She got in touch with the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, and she found me. And we did meet up again. Yeah, somewhere in California, right? Yeah. Yes?
Who arranged the Kindertransport, and why did Germany allow the children to leave?
Why did Germany allow the children to leave?
Who arranged for the
who arranged? Okay, there were committees. It's a good question. I don't have a clear answer, but there were committees in Germany from the Jewish community, there were some special people involved, women, I have their names written down somewhere, I don't know them by heart, who were very involved. We had to pay, not we didn't have to pay, they had to raise £50 for each child as a guarantee for the British government. £50 had to be raised, and they raised the money, and for each £50 another child could go.
How much was £50 at that time?
Pardon?
How much was £50?
How much £50? Well, at that point, what was £50 in 1939? At least $4 to the pound. Probably $200 or more, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it didn't last very long, because the children stayed there. They never left. We were supposed to just go for a little while because the war wasn't going to last long. So.
Okay,
Yeah. Okay.
thank you. Thank you all very much.
More eloquent. I There was one published citizen that has been published. No, that's why I ordered it.
Yeah,
I'm lucky for you that she's your neighbor.
I know.